This video may or may not talk about you, so I'll say that viewer discretion is advised. You might get angry. TSB has been out for 1 year and 6 months. Throughout that time, I've played for hundreds of hours and had plenty of time to analyze the community and how they behave. Specifically the players that take PvP more seriously than the rest, and hate every character that isn't one of these. Every fighting game has some sort of community that unintentionally develops its own honor system, then rolls with it. What is an honor system? It's basically when players of a specific game realize some features or mechanics can make PvP absolutely miserable, so they pass on using them. Let's use this game I used to play called Final Stand as an example. This game has special sensu bean items that boosted you in several different ways that would have made PvP nearly impossible, but nobody used them in actual fights and respected that unstated rule for years. This same system is present in the Strongest Battlegrounds in its own distorted way. You may have encountered someone who's told you that you had to change your moveset because it's unfair, or complained about it because it's too strong. Some movesets have become more socially accepted than others. These honor systems exist in every fighting game, but that doesn't mean they make sense in every fighting game. So what about the Strongest Battlegrounds? In this game, many players expect you and want you to fight in a very specific way. This style usually consists of staying up close and trying to land a dash of some sort. Typically a side dash paired with a punch or an M1 in order to start a combo, or just fighting up close in general. M1 trading is broadly used, and in turn, quick blocks are used very often as well. This is what a huge amount of the player base does, so lots of people are going to be sort of thrown off or annoyed when you deviate from this norm. You walk backwards for 2 seconds, you're running. You hold block for just a bit too long, you're a block spammer. You use the same attack twice in a row, you're spamming it. Players will literally say to your face that you are spamming because you are using a core game mechanic too often for their taste. And it's not going to be some broken feature. It's probably just going to be something as simple as blocking. In fact, let me show you an experience I quite literally just had. Me and this dude got into a little kerfuffle, and I kept beating him in 1v1s over and over, and he just wouldn't stop coming back. He eventually called me a spammer, and it took a few deaths to get him to explain how I was a spammer. According to him, I was using the same combo over and over, which is spamming, in his mind, of course. TSB isn't a very complex game. The combat system is actually very simple, but it's the good kind of simple. It doesn't have as many mechanics as other fighting games, and players typically create their own techniques using pre-existing mechanics, which are dubbed as techs. Even though the game lacks the amount of mechanics that some other fighting games have, the skill ceiling is still high enough to where you won't find yourself on equal footing with most people. This unfortunately means that there's less for people to complain about, which makes them complain about the stuff that nobody should be complaining about, like blocking. So many players are used to quick bursts of blocking in instances like M1 trading instead of holding it for long periods of time, so they naturally don't react well when someone holds it for slightly longer than usual. As I explained before, any playstyle that involves deviating from the norm will annoy some people. The best example of this is playing passively. This is when you abandon the constant close quarters combat and step back a bit so you can fight a little bit smarter and a little bit more calculated. Some people decide to step back and not fight at all. A good example of this is a deadly ninja player sitting decently far away and holding the block button because all of their moves are easily counterable or blockable. They might just not be suited for close quarters combat, and their attacks aren't good enough on their own, so they wait for the opponent to come to them. For a guy that wants to get up close and throw hands, this is probably the most annoying type of player to fight. They might not have the proper experience to fight against this passive player because they're probably mostly fighting Hero Hunter mains in ranked. And there's a good chance this passive player knows how to bait people properly by just sitting there. When such a large amount of players fight in the same way, the passive player's countermeasures work on nearly everyone. A player using either of these characters is forced to change their style when they rarely have to, so they lose a lot of that close quarters skill they have. And instead of adapting to the situation, they think the best option is to hurl accusations of running, spamming, and all the like. I'm even guilty of doing this myself, although I don't think I was ever foolish enough to type out the phrase block spammer. If I did, then it is what it is. The thinking surrounding the use of techs is kind of dumb in my opinion. If you're one of those people that don't know what techs are, they're basically custom techniques made by combining different game mechanics and/or attacks. These typically get claimed by a specific player and named after that player. So that's why you might have heard something like Lord Heaven Tech. Many claim that using techs is a part of being good. This makes people associate techs with being good at the game, which makes no sense as most of these techs can be learned and repeated within 20 minutes of practice. Associating techs with being good just causes some players to think that their opponent is somehow being cheap or getting lucky when they win after not using a single tech, when in reality they just got outplayed. I had a personal experience where this exact thing happened against your typical hero hunter main who used all of the basic techs and had the most easily readable side dashes. I won the fight with little to no use of techs, and the guy immediately said, "I got lucky." The way to truly tell if someone is good at the game is by watching how fast and precise their movements are, and then also seeing how they react to your movements. Getting good in this game takes a lot of time. It's not going to happen overnight, it's going to happen over dozens of hours. Some of TSB's honor system does make sense though. Take ultimates for example. Ultimates, or awakenings, are much stronger than the base movesets, and lots of them break the rules of balancing that the base movesets have. They have much higher range, damage, bigger hitboxes, and a lot more iframes. If you don't know what iframes are, it's when you use an attack, and then during that attack, you can't be stunned or hurt. Ultimates also fully heal you, basically restarting the progress you made on your opponent, while also giving them heavily boosted moves. It makes perfect sense as to why players would respect each other and not use ultimates, although in most cases, people use their ultimates in every area they possibly can, and that's fine. They're not rare, but sometimes you'll find people who want to have clean fights with no awakenings. There's nothing wrong with using your awakening in a fight, as it's a core game mechanic, but finding a person that doesn't use them is nice. The last thing I want to talk about is the promotion of certain characters and the stigma associated with others. As I mentioned before, there are certain characters that are more socially accepted than others. The two main characters that get used the most and promoted as the fair and skilled options are the Strongest Hero and Hero Hunter. These were the first two characters in the game, so they feel a lot different than most of the characters nowadays, as there was a pretty big shift when Destructive Cyborg came out. All of the other characters that followed had more varied, diverse attacks and abilities, typically involving range and being more mobile, as opposed to the more stationary first two characters. The thing with the Strongest Hero and Hero Hunter is the fact that they have nearly zero ranged capabilities, unless you want to count the pitiful normal punch shockwave or this Hunter's Grasp thing. When you fight a player that only uses the Strongest Hero and Hero Hunter, they're going to be happy if you use either of those two characters against them. Using quite literally any other character could trigger them to say something when they lose, and only if they lose. The amount of undocumented experiences I've had where people have complained about me using a character that they think is unfair while they've been using either of the two characters I've been talking about is astronomical. What are these unfair characters? The big two are Wild Psychic and Destructive Cyborg. Cyborg used to be the most hated character for a while after it came out due to the fact that it was almost entirely made up of ranged attacks, which were the complete polar opposite of the first two characters that came before. It took way too long for everybody to get used to fighting long-range characters with close-range characters, and even after they figured it out, they still just didn't want to bother with them. I feel like Cyborg could have had a much easier time transitioning into the game if there was a character that came before that had a mix of close and long-range attacks. Everyone kinda laid off Cyborg nowadays, and Wild Psychic is by far the most hated character in the game at the moment. I don't even need to explain why, but I'll go ahead and do so anyways. It has pretty capable ranged attacks, and it requires more than just constant side dash punches to beat. I was curious about all of this, and I decided to do a few polls. First, I made a poll on my YouTube community tab asking which character everyone thinks is the best. The best as in the combination of all categories such as base moveset, awakening, passive ability, usability, etc. And the Strongest Hero won this by an absolute landslide as per usual. I then did a poll asking everyone what the most unfair character is. Many players try to justify their losses against some characters by saying that they're unfair, which may make sense until you see the results of this poll. I added the exact same options in the exact same order, and Wild Psychic came in hot with 70% of the votes. It's nearly the exact opposite of the first poll, which doesn't make any sense at all. The vast majority of the community believes that the strongest hero is the best character, yet they also believe that Wild Psychic is the most unfair. This isn't a specific matchup between characters, by the way, it's a general consensus. This is a simple misuse of a word. Whatever they don't like fighting against, they consider to be unfair. I think a better term would be annoying instead of unfair. The word has been twisted to fit what they all think instead of what it actually means. You can't have a character that is the best while also having a completely different character that is unfair. If the strongest hero is the best, it's the best fit for fighting against any character, right? If it's the best, then use that character against the character you think is unfair, and you should have the best chance of beating them because it's the best character. Wouldn't the best character also be the most unfair because it's quite literally the best? Its abilities surpass the rest, so what's the problem? There is no universally unfair character, and it all depends on specific character matchups because in this game, the characters are actually different from each other. In my opinion, the Strongest Battlegrounds PvP is 90% skill and 10% character, but that 10% can become much larger or smaller if you stick to one character and become weak in others. I've had more time to think about it, and I've come to the conclusion that the strongest hero and hero hunter are just too simple. Every other character requires actual thought and timing to string combos together, catch people, etc. Meanwhile, the first two characters are simply muscle memory for most, and they only take like 30 minutes each to fully learn. You can teach someone a 50% damage strongest hero combo and get them to perfect it in 3 minutes. And all of Hero Hunter's techs are incredibly easy to perform. With every other character, combos aren't always the same, and there's much more room for failure, which is another thing that these types of players don't want to bother with. They'd rather stick with the characters that allow you to turn your brain off and use the same overly simple and consistent 50% combo over and over. For the people that worship these characters, I can guarantee you the game will become much more fun if you just take the time to get good with every character and mess around on free-for-all servers. Get out of ranked before you go insane, trust me. In the end, this is a fighting game. No matter how balanced or how good it is, there will always be players that will complain. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.